ทัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ So we're drawing to the close of this year's Rains Retreat. Another week or so to go. The Dhamma is still the Dhamma. The truth is still the truth. The way of practice is still the way of practice, whether it's the beginning of the vasa or the end, whatever day of the year, whatever year of your life, day of the year, the practice doesn't really change. Because the Buddha has already done much of the groundwork for us. When he was alive, he did his own practice and had his own realization, awakening on the night of his enlightenment. And then he spent his life teaching what he understood, penetrated with his own insight into suffering and the end of suffering. Without the Buddha, we'd be lost, floating around in the world, in our lives, not being quite sure where to go, even if we had some idea of what is good and bad, what is leading to the end of suffering, what is not. It wouldn't be complete. We need the efforts of the Buddha for that. So every time we practice or hear the Dhamma, one thing we're doing is recollecting the teachings of the Buddha and the goodness of the Buddha with gratitude. If we didn't have the Buddha, we wouldn't know, we wouldn't have a starting point for the practice. But sometimes we try and get around our own ignorance and uncertainty about the practice by studying as much as we can, listening as much as we can to the Dhamma, studying as much, reading as much as we can, which can be a very valuable thing, but at the same time it doesn't make up for our own practice and development of the mind and direct insight into the truth through our own experience. You know, the written word can't replace that, but we sometimes feel it can. We think the more we read, the more we'll understand and know, and somehow get closer to the truth. But these teachings are to be put into practice. And the Dhamma that we listen to and study can only take us up to one point. And then we have to take a leap into, with our faith in the Buddha and ourselves, our own abilities, we have to take a leap into actually practicing, which is why we come together to chant and meditate and learn, particularly learn how to train this mind in the qualities of mindfulness and insight. And Ajahn Chah used to say, it's one thing to read about mental defilements, like greed, anger, delusion, It's another thing to know them with your heart. And when you read the word greed, anger, delusion, you might read, oh, this is the cause of suffering. And the Buddha said, oh, we should abandon, let go of the cause of suffering, which is correct. But it's just the description on the paper. It's not yet the actual experience of knowing greed or anger or different forms of delusion and then in that moment letting them go. And the only way we can do that is through cultivating the clarity, the awareness, and then the insight to do it with our own mind, through our own experience. Somebody can tell you that a fire is hot any number of times, but part of your mind probably still doubts it if you've never put your hand close to heat or the flames. You won't fully understand until you've actually maybe burnt your hand or at least got it really hot, and then you'll know, oh, this is not good, and you'll keep your hand away from that in the future. Well, the mind is the same. The Buddha said, mental defilements are the cause of suffering. They are rooted in ignorance, avijja, not knowing, not understanding. And they manifest as tanha, craving or wanting, sensual desire, wanting to become, wanting not to become, and clinging, upadana. And the Buddha has described this for us. He's done all the work. But for us, we have to apply our mind to really know that for ourselves, to know the cause of suffering is craving, to recognize that. And much of the time we don't realize when craving is active in our mind. We're not fully aware. May have a vague idea, so it's like walking near the fire, but you just feel a little bit hot, so you're vaguely aware there's a fire there. But we're not getting burnt or haven't recognized that we're getting burnt yet, so we're not feeling the danger of it. It's only when mental defilements come up really strong we perhaps notice them. Get really angry, really afraid, or really sad, or really frustrated. Then you might say, oh, there's something wrong here. Much of the time these mental defilements are just bubbling away, doing their thing. But we're not fully aware of them. We're not fully awakened to them. So we don't yet recognize that they're things to be abandoned. So we're quite happy to have a bit of greed, anger, delusion in our mind. We're used to it. It's normal for us. So the Buddha encouraged us to develop this quality of knowing. We say the one who knows. That's how Ajahn put it. Puru, the one who knows. The ability to turn our attention inwards and see this mind more closely, examine it more closely, so we can recognize what are kilesa, mental defilements, and what do they do to our mind. When there's not much awareness, what we tend to do is take them as self. I am angry, I am greedy, I am worried, I'm jealous, I'm fed up. Whatever the particular mental state or mood is, we take it as me, myself. And immediately there's no clarity to recognize it as to see a defilement as a defilement. We just they just become mixed up with our mind. It becomes who we are in that moment. So the Buddha encouraged us to cultivate the path, which is all these different qualities, sila, samadhi, panya, the Eightfold, the Noble Eightfold Path, to bring up the skills, the knowledge, the awareness to see defilements as they are and then abandon them. When we do abandon them, then there's something better arises. If only temporarily we abandon greed in that moment, when you let go of some greed, some obsession that you've had in your mind, something you've really been caught up in. When you let it go, you start to feel free, don't you? A different kind of freedom than just the freedom of letting go of that thing that was bothering you, agitating your mind. Whether it's lust or this desire for particular material objects, or some desire for some very pleasant experience that you want or you've had before and you want to get back. When you establish mindfulness and you reflect, you can see, oh, this is suffering. That desire is suffering because it's making my mind ill at ease, unhappy, frustrated. And then often we're getting what we don't like, experiences that are painful, unpleasant, and we want to get rid of them, which also agitates the mind. When you establish this quality of the one who knows, you can see that happening. And you see, well, the way out of suffering at this point is to abandon or de-identify or let go of this particular aversion, irritation, hatred. And then when you've done it, if only briefly, you get a new insight. You get insight into the cessation of suffering, the goal of the practice. And that's not something you're just reading or speculating on. It's something you can know in the moment. You've had some strong attachment come up in one way or another. You've recognized it by establishing mindfulness, and you let it be, as it were. You stop grasping hold of it or identifying with it. Well, it goes quiet, doesn't it? The mind goes still. We say it goes empty. But emptiness doesn't mean nothing, doesn't mean nothing there, no, nothing at all. It just means empty of that defilement. That the cause of suffering has been abandoned in that moment when you establish mindfulness. It becomes empty, and empty is peaceful. It's still, it's quiet. The mind at that moment doesn't need anything else to be happy, because greed, anger and delusion has been abandoned in that moment. And that's something we can all experience. It's not something just for very saintly monks living in the forest somewhere far away, or it's not some distant experience we may have in some future life when we're close to Nibbana. Establishing mindfulness in the present moment is something we all are capable of. We all have that ability, but we need to develop it more, bring it up, develop it and experience it. So when we come together to meditate, that's what we're doing. We're practicing this ability to know the mind, the experience in the present moment, recognize the suffering and the cause of it, and then abandon the cause of suffering and experience the cessation of suffering. You've probably already done that today. You've already had an insight into the Four Noble Truths in one way or another today. Just may not be sustained or constant. It comes and goes, it arises and passes away like everything else, even in the path of practice that we are following the Buddha. Because it's not yet sustained, then it's like everything else in the world. It arises and ceases. You have moments of clarity, and then moments when we lose our clarity. we're back with the with the confusion or the suffering or the agitation. You'll see that as you meditate. Maybe it's moments when you fall into sleepiness. At the end of the day when you meditate, often sleepiness, tiredness drags us down. Meditating in the morning is often expectation, isn't it? That's what agitates you. You're going to plan your day, what you're going to do, where you're going to go. But either way, they're just different sides of the same coin. When we experience some clarity after that effort of bringing up mindfulness, this one who knows, you might experience letting go, cessation for a while. Something that was bothering you stops bothering you, and you know it. You know, oh, that's gone. And that's a moment of proof for you personally. That's you proving that what the Buddha taught is correct. Not just on paper, but in your own personal practice. And a lot of our confidence and faith to keep practicing comes from there. From our own efforts. You could say self-confidence, self-belief even, but it's belief that's backed by experience. It's not speculative belief. It's not guessing. It's knowing. That's what the Buddha was encouraging us to develop, the knowing, to know your own mind, know your own experience, to know that if you let go of angry thoughts, unpleasant feelings that condition angry thoughts, you're better off, you're happier. To let go of some form of desire that's mixed up with greed and attachment, you're better off. Your mind becomes more peaceful, it's more free. This is the inner freedom of having more self-control and having insight, as opposed to what most people take as freedom, which is having the money, the power, the control of life to be able to do and say and get what you want as much as you can, which is not real freedom because you're still a slave to craving and attachment. Inner freedom comes from having enough clarity to see things the way they are and to let go of the causes of suffering. To choose whether to pursue a way of thinking or hold on to a certain belief or opinion or view that actually you're seeing is harming you. Then you can say, oh no, I'm not going to keep holding on to this, or at least I'm going to question it, not just blindly attach. Because as you continue to practice developing mindfulness, awareness, this quality of knowing, it starts to reveal to you some of your own attachments more. You see them more deeply. Things we just take for granted normally, but then when you come to meditate you realize, oh, maybe I shouldn't take it for granted. And the tools that help you to do this are investigation of these three universal characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness or dukkha, and the lack of self, lack of a permanent, abiding self in both physical and mental phenomena. These are the tools that help us to let go of delusion. This isn't the kind of knowledge you get really when you go out into the world, when you study at school or at work or even through society and culture. Society, culture, our education is building up a knowledge based on sense of self and attachment. It's bound up or mixed up with craving and attachment, so it's still going to lead to suffering. Otherwise, the more people gain knowledge of the world, the more they should be free from suffering, become enlightened, fully awakened people. But it's clearly not happening. Not very fast, anyway. Whereas the Dhamma is different. The Dhamma is leading inwards and leading you to examine your experience much more closely. And you can still gain knowledge of the world and understanding of the world if you wish, but the knowledge that comes from the Dhamma is exposing the causes of suffering to you, revealing them. It's saying wherever you attach, cling with delusion, you suffer. That's why Ajahn Chah once made that sort of comment, if somebody's gained a degree, say a bachelor's degree, they go to uni and get that, which is good. They put a lot of effort into their study maybe, but they'll still have suffering. On the deeper level, they haven't seen through attachment and craving, so they have the suffering of someone with a bachelor's degree. Someone may go on and study and get a master's degree. And that takes a lot of work. It's something to be praised, but they'll have the suffering of someone with a master's degree. Or someone may go on and get a PhD, which also comes through a lot of work and effort. But then they'll have the suffering of someone with a PhD. There's a separation between the knowledge of the world that we employ to earn a living, earn money, do things, make things, get things done in the world. There's a separation between that and the knowledge of Dhamma, which is ending craving and attachment. And you can certainly gain knowledge of the world and practice the Dhamma at the same time. But the outcomes of these two branches of knowledge, you could say, are not quite the same. The outcome of the study and practice of Dhamma is you're reducing suffering, ending suffering. There's a story Ajahn Chah used to tell about one of his teachers, Lumpur Tongrat, was considered to be an enlightened monk, very wise, peaceful, and had some unusual ways of teaching the Dhamma to his students. And one time he was walking with a line of monks on alms round, going towards the village, and in northeast Thailand it's quite common you walk across fields from the forest going to the village, and you quite often encounter buffalo and cows that there are farmers and they've put them out in the fields, and you walk past them. And Lumpur Tongrat was leading the monks, and he walked past a male buffalo, and he turned and he walked past a female buffalo, if I remember. It doesn't really matter, but he walked past a female buffalo. He turned to one of the monks and said, "Oh, did you see that male buffalo?" And the monk answered, what? He's confused because he saw a female buffalo. Well, Lumpur Tongrat, who's a teacher, so he respects his teacher, and just said it was a male buffalo. So he was thinking, has my teacher got it wrong? Why is he saying male buffalo? It's a female. It's clearly a female buffalo. There are obvious biological differences. And they walked on a bit further, and Lumpur Tongrat turned and said, "Did you see that female buffalo?" And the monk thought, he's really crazy. First he sees it as a male buffalo, now he sees it as a female buffalo. Which is it? The buffalo is the buffalo. Lumpur Tongrat didn't explain anything more, he just carried on walking. And the monk was stuck with his confusion, which first comes up as a kind of the protest in the mind. Why is the teacher saying a female buffalo is a male buffalo? What's got into him? What's wrong? Everyone knows what a female buffalo looks like and what a male buffalo looks like. They're different. And he's even contradicting himself. One moment he says it's a male, and the next moment he says it's a female. And then he carries on, but doesn't explain anything more. The teacher is fully awakened. He can say anything he wants because he's not attached to the words, he's not attached to the concepts, to the convention. His mind is completely free from greed, anger and delusion. So it's just giving a teaching on how we do attach to the concepts, the labels, the conventional reality. And you can call a male buffalo a female buffalo if you so choose, because these are just names, labels. But we're sometimes, so attached to the label, that knowledge, that's the worldly knowledge, and we get so attached to it we don't see beyond it, beyond the labeling activity of the mind. In essence, a buffalo is just a collection of elements, isn't it? Earth, air, temperature and water, the four elements come together biologically, genetically, they're fashioned together as a buffalo. You can call it a male buffalo if that's the gender and that's correct on one level. But on the deeper level, it's just a collection of earth, air, fire and water. There's no buffalo, there's no name, there's no nothing. And Potongrat is seeing that deeper level, the profound level, the higher level. But the monk is stuck in his normal perceptions. The normal way of thinking is male or female buffalo. And we do that all the time. We attach to the labels and we believe them and we cling on to them, identify with them as me, mine, myself, my knowledge, my opinion, my view. And then we argue with other people over their view. We even get upset over these things. You can argue it's a male, it's a female. You can even fight, have conflicts, and maybe even kill each other over labels, over different things in life, over our views, politics, religion, money, resources, all the things that people fight over. But in the end, it's just labels, conventional reality that we attach so much importance to, and we don't see the deeper level that these things are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and they're not self. So Lumpur Tongrat in that moment was just teaching that monk, giving him the opportunity to think more deeply, go beyond the conceptual attachment he had. And we can, practice that in our own meditation when the thought comes up, this is right, or that's wrong, this is what I like, and it's good for me, this is bad and wrong for me. We establish mindfulness and just look and learn from those labels that we put onto our own experience. Maybe they're just feelings, based on feelings, aren't they? A pleasant feeling that comes from certain experiences, and then painful feelings. And feelings are just doing their duty. There's no real person involved in that. You eat something that tastes good to you, you feel pleasure. It's just, we say in Buddhism, we say it's the duty of food that you like, that agrees with you, to give you pleasure. There's no person involved in that. It's just an experience of chemicals on your tongue, say. Or a certain food that you disagree with, you don't like, gives you some unpleasant feeling, some painful feeling. It's just doing its duty. The food is just the food. It's not a person, a being, a self. It's just doing its duty. And two people can eat the same food and have a different reaction too. One person likes one kind of food, another person doesn't like it. But it's just doing a duty, it's impersonal. We say it's impermanent, unsatisfactory, not self. If you have mindfulness enough to know that, then you can experience the pleasure, but you don't get lost in it. It doesn't stimulate craving and clinging. We don't create a self around it. We just know it. Oh, it tastes like this. Or the other kind of food that's unpleasant, we know, oh, it's like this. It's unpleasant, I don't like this, it doesn't agree with me. But you don't create a self out of it. Or Ajahn Chah used to talk about the guy who went to market and bought a spittoon. And spittoon in the old days in Thailand could be used for either literally spitting in or putting rubbish, or sometimes used as a urinal at night. When you need to go to the toilet at night, you go to the corner of the room and you urinate into a spittoon. So he buys his spittoon, he comes home, but it's still brand new, it's clean, unused. So he uses it to put rice in. He cooks rice and uses it as a rice pot. And his friend sees him and says, "Why are you putting rice in a spittoon? That's dirty. How can you do that? It's a terrible thing to do." But it's a brand new, clean spittoon. It's made of metal or enamel. Perfectly, it's made of the same materials maybe as the normal rice pot. Maybe slightly different shape, and it has a different title. Rice pot, spittoon, the words sound different. But it's just a mixture of metal and or clay or whatever the materials are. Whatever you choose to call them, spittoon or urinal or rice pot, doesn't matter, does it? It's up to you. And if it's clean, then you can't criticize on the grounds of hygiene to eat out of a clean vessel. And yet, his friend, the man's friend, is so upset. He storms off. How can you eat rice out of a spittoon? It's such a dirty thing to do, even though the spittoon's never been used for anything other than cooking rice. And this is where we suffer. But when we bring up mindfulness, we investigate our beliefs, our views, and what we think is right and wrong, and the nature of this world. Then we start to go more deeply into it, go beyond the worldly knowledge or the conventional reality and conventions of language and concepts and ideas. And you still know what the concepts are. It's not like you don't know what a spittoon is or what a rice pot is. But you also know there's a deeper reality. And that's where you can free your mind from suffering. As you're meditating, these thoughts, memories come up, your plans about the future, your thoughts about what's happened in the past, good and bad. And then in the present moment, you may have, your mind is manufacturing all kinds of different thoughts. But if you establish mindfulness and you reflect on them, you can question them and say, well, how real is this? Because a thought is just a thought. It's just a collection of words, ideas, images. It arises, it ceases. And you've had billions of thoughts since you first were born, and you probably have a few billion more before you die. Thoughts arise, pass away. Moods of pleasure, happiness, suffering, they arise, they pass away. That's the deeper truth. When you're meditating, that's what you're exposing or revealing to your mind. And you see, when you give too much meaning and importance to every idea, every belief you have, you're setting up suffering for yourself. And how often have we believed something to be true and found out later it's not? Our mind is constantly lying to us. We don't realize it, but we believe everything. It's our default view or mode of things is just to believe every thought. I must be right because I've thought it. But how often has that been proven wrong or mistaken? And this is why we keep practicing mindfulness and meditation and investigating the truth. We're educating ourselves on the inside. We've done lots of education on the outside, and that's useful for getting a job, living in this world. But we need to educate ourselves on the inside so that we view the world from the place of Dhamma, truth, rather than just knowledge and beliefs that may be correct, in line with truth, or maybe not. And the more we bring our mind in line with the truth, the more peaceful, the more free we are from suffering. So leave you with those thoughts tonight.